People think crying easily is a sign of instability. Psychology disagrees completely. Some of the most socially intelligent, deeply connected people on this planet cry more than everyone else. So, why do we treat it like a flaw? That answer will surprise you. We live in a culture that celebrates emotional restraint. Keep a straight face, hold it together in front of others. Never let them see the crack in your composure. But here's what psychology has quietly uncovered. People who cry easily aren't malfunctioning. They're running one of the oldest social signals in human biology, one that evolution kept around for a reason. And science is starting to explain exactly why. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a side of crying almost nobody talks about, where the behavior actually comes from, what it's doing biologically, and why it might be one of the most misunderstood traits in human connection. Think about the last time you saw someone cry in front of a group and instinctively felt the urge to move closer to them, to comfort them, to soften your own tone. That reaction wasn't random. Researchers who study emotional expression have long noted that tears change how other people behave toward us almost instantly. A face with tears is treated as more trustworthy, less threatening, and more in need of support than the exact same face without them. This isn't learned steroid etiquette. It runs deeper than culture. Evolutionary psychologists refer to this as a signaling function. Tears visibly blur and impair vision momentarily. And in evolutionary terms, that's costly. You become briefly more vulnerable. The theory, sometimes called the handicap principle, suggests that a costly, hard to fake signal is more believable precisely because it's costly. In other words, crying may have persisted in humans, specifically because it can't easily be faked, which makes it a uniquely honest signal of genuine distress. Just before we continue, my name is Jenna, and we just launched this channel for people passionate about psychology and human behavior, just like you. The goal is to understand the hidden mechanisms behind people, emotions, and social interactions. If you want to help us keep going and improve the videos, think about subscribing. It's free, and it makes a huge difference for us. Okay, let's continue. People who cry easily aren't weaker at controlling this signal. They're simply more willing or less able to suppress it. And that's only the surface of what's happening inside them. Here's something most people never consider. Biochemist William Frey ran one of the first detailed studies comparing emotional tears to reflexive ones, the kind produced by cutting an onion. His research found that emotional tears are chemically distinct, carrying different protein and hormone concentrations, tears triggered by irritation alone. This means the body treats emotional crying as a separate biological process entirely, not just a wet version of an eye irritation response, but something closer to a regulated release mechanism. Their bodies aren't overreacting. They're running a distinct physiological process most people never activate as frequently. This is why a person who cries easily might tear up during a warm reunion, a stranger's small act of generosity, or a moment of overwhelming relief. Situations with no threat and no sadness at all. It's not fragility. It's not an inability to cope. It's a nervous system fluent in a signal most people rarely use. And because of that, they often function differently in relationships than people assume. Research on attachment styles has found an interesting pattern. People with more secure attachment, meaning they generally trust that others will respond well to their emotions, tend to cry more openly than people with avoidant attachment, who often suppress visible emotion as a form of self-protection. In other words, crying easily is frequently linked not to insecurity, but to a baseline trust that the people around you can handle your emotions. They read relationships as safe enough to be visibly human in. So when they cry, they're not falling apart. They're operating from a place many people spend years in therapy trying to reach. There's a specific hormonal process that most people who cry easily experience regularly. and it has nothing to do with sadness at all. It's the release that follows the tears, not the trigger that caused them. Not emotional collapse, physiological recalibration, a measurable shift in the body's chemistry within minutes of crying. Researchers have identified prolactin and oxytocin as two of the compounds released during emotional crying, both associated with bonding, comfort, and stress reduction. It's the same neurochemical pathway involved in physical touch and social closeness, and in people who cry frequently, that pathway gets activated far more often than average. Watching a loved one succeed, hearing an old song tied to a memory, sitting with a friend during a hard conversation. For someone wired this way, these moments trigger a genuine chemical bonding response. They're experiences that release something inside them immediately and physically. And it creates something quietly beneficial that almost nobody talks about. They're not just having an emotional moment, they're getting a measurable dose of the same chemistry that strengthens human attachment. This is part of why people who cry easily often report feeling closer to others after emotional moments rather than embarrassed by them. They weren't just present in the moment. Their biology was actively building connection through it. Their tears in these situations aren't oversharing. They aren't inappropriate. They're a direct byproduct of a bonding system most people rarely let fully switch on. But that openness, it comes with a social cost most people underestimate. Not everyone reads tears the way researchers do. In many professional and cultural contexts, visible crying is still read as a loss of control, particularly for certain groups more than others. Studies on workplace perception have found that men who cry in professional settings are judged more harshly on average than women who do the same, while both are judged more harshly than in casual social settings. For people who cry easily, this creates a persistent tension. They aren't just managing tears, they're constantly managing other people's interpretation of those tears. This is called emotional double consciousness, the simultaneous experience of a feeling and the awareness of how that feeling is being watched. It's exhausting in a way that has nothing to do with the original emotion at all. What's misunderstood about this is the assumption that they cry because they can't help it. That's not quite right. What's closer to the truth is that many of them have simply decided the cost of suppressing it isn't worth the cost of feeling disconnected from their own reactions. The signal stays honest, the performance of composure gets dropped, and because of that, they often build relationships with a level of authenticity that guarded people rarely reach. There's a reason certain respected leaders throughout history were known and even praised for crying openly in moments of genuine grief or triumph. The same openness that made them visibly emotional also made people trust them more, not less, in the moments that mattered most. Emotional visibility is not always comfortable. It is, however, credible. The person who lets a moment show on their face isn't losing composure. They're offering something harder to fake than composure ever was. They're offering proof. But even with all of that going on internally, there's a psychological contrast worth understanding. And that's where something unexpected enters the picture. There's a recognized condition called alexithymia, a difficulty identifying and describing one's own emotions internally. People with alexithymia often report rarely crying, not because they feel less, but because they struggle to consciously register what they're feeling in the first place. Researchers studying this condition have noted that an inability to cry is sometimes linked to poorer emotional processing overall, not superior control. In other words, the absence of tears isn't automatically strength. Sometimes it's simply reduced access to one's own internal signal. For people who cry easily, the opposite is true. Their access to their own internal state is fast, clear, and immediate. The signal isn't broken, it isn't delayed, it isn't buried. Think of it this way: a smoke detector that never goes off isn't necessarily in a safer house. Sometimes it just isn't working. The person who cries easily has a fully functioning internal alarm system. Frequent tears are not always signs of a problem. Sometimes they're signs that the internal signal is working exactly as it should. And when you understand that, when you see crying not as malfunction, but as clear internal signaling, the whole picture of what it means to cry easily begins to shift. Here's the part that gets almost no airtime in the cultural conversation about emotional people. They are often exceptional at the things that matter most in close relationships. People who cry easily tend to build trust faster than people who don't. They don't have to convince others they're being genuine. Their biology does it for them, visibly, consistently, often without meaning to. They're typically easier to read accurately, not because they perform less, but because their internal state and outward expression stay closely aligned. They give people less to guess at. They leave less room for misinterpretation. They tend to build relationships with fewer hidden layers. What you see with them is closer to what's actually happening inside because they've stopped spending energy hiding it. And they possess something increasingly rare, a visible, undisguised alignment between feeling and expression. They haven't learned to perform composure. They haven't built a mask that outlasts the moment. They stay legible to themselves and to everyone around them. The joy, the grief, the sudden overwhelm of an ordinary moment. That isn't a lack of control wearing the wrong label. That is a form of transparency most relationships quietly need more of. So, here's the question worth sitting with. What if the most trustworthy person in the room isn't the one whose face never changes? The one who reveals nothing no matter what happens? What if the most trustworthy person in the room is the one whose reactions you never have to question? Who hasn't traded honesty for composure? What if crying easily isn't the opposite of reliability? What if it is, in its own quiet way, a form of reliability? People who cry easily have been misread for most of their lives, labeled as unstable, told to get it together, made to feel like something about them needs correcting. But psychology tells a different story. Crying easily often means your internal signal is intact. It means your body still trusts the people around you enough to be honest in front of them. It means your emotional expression runs closer to the truth than most people's ever gets to. It means you are still, despite everything this world does to discourage it, legible in a way few people remain. That's not something to apologize for, that's something to understand. If this video changed the way you see emotional people, even just a little, subscribe for more psychology insights that most of us never stop to notice. And drop a comment. Do you think crying easily builds trust or breaks it?